in a show of solidarity.
On those issues, these would be.
But even amid a generational
now things are turning around for
between the U.S. and Canada.
The government of Canada, and that in the construction of the bridge, obviously there's Canadian steel, Canadian workers, but also U.S. steel, U.S. workers.
Been allowed to roll across it. The Gordie Howe International Bridge connects Canada to America, joining the Canadian side directly to Detroit, and right now it is standing completely empty because the administration of President Donald Trump has kept it sealed shut. I want to take you through how one of the biggest cross-border projects on the entire northern frontier turned into a locked gate, why the name of a wealthy political donor keeps surfacing in the middle of it, and why voices in Washington and in Canada are now openly asking the same simple question. How long can a completely finished, fully paid-for bridge sit there doing nothing at all before somebody finally gives in and opens it? Let me start from the beginning, because this is a story that sounds almost impossible when you first hear it. Imagine spending years planning a project, breaking ground, pouring concrete, stringing steel cables high above a river, employing thousands of workers, and then finally reaching the day when everything is complete. The paint is dry, the lanes are marked, the lights work, and then, at the very last moment, right before the ribbon is supposed to be cut, everything grinds to a halt. That is exactly what happened with this bridge, and I still find it remarkable every time I go over the details. The bridge in question links Windsor, in the Canadian province of Ontario, with the city of Detroit, in the American state of Michigan. If you know anything about the map of North America, you know this is one of the most important crossing points between the two countries. An enormous share of the trade that moves between Canada and the United States passes through this exact corridor. Trucks loaded with car parts, food, machinery, and countless other goods travel back and forth across this stretch of the border every single day. So when I tell you that a new bridge was built here, understand that this was not some minor local project. This was a piece of continental infrastructure, something meant to carry the weight of two national economies on its shoulders. Construction officially came to an end on the 9th of June. That was the moment the crews stepped back and declared the work complete. An opening was planned, a proper ceremony, the kind of event where officials from both sides of the border show up, cameras roll, and speeches are given about friendship and cooperation between neighbors. Everything was arranged. And then, on the 11th of June, just one day before that ribbon cutting was scheduled to take place, the plans were canceled. Not delayed by a few hours, not pushed back for a small technical fix, but canceled outright. And in the weeks that followed, the bridge simply stayed closed. No traffic, no crossing, nothing. Now let me put a number on what was spent here, because the number is what makes this so striking. Canada paid roughly $6.4 billion to build this bridge. That is Canadian money, an enormous public investment, and the finished structure is publicly owned. It belongs to both Canada and to the state of Michigan on the American side. So you have a bridge that two governments own together, that Canadian taxpayers largely paid for, standing complete and unused because the crossing has not been given the green light to open for traffic. Think about that for a moment. Billions of dollars of steel and concrete sitting silent over the water, and the whole thing is being held in limbo. The natural question anyone would ask is simple. Why? Why would a bridge this important, this expensive, this ready to go, be left closed? And this is where the story stops being just about roads and trade and starts becoming something a lot more interesting. Because to understand why this bridge is frozen, you have to understand who stands to lose if it opens. For decades, there was already a major crossing at this same location. It is called the Ambassador Bridge, and it has long been the busiest way to move goods across the border in this region. Here is the detail that changes everything. The Ambassador Bridge is privately owned. It is not a public structure. It belongs to a wealthy family, and the man at the center of it is named Matthew Marone. His family has controlled that crossing for a very long time, collecting the tolls and the traffic and the business that comes with being the main gateway between these two great cities. Now put yourself in that position for a moment. You own the old bridge. You have made a fortune from it. And then the two governments come along and build a brand new bridge right next to yours, a modern crossing that is expected to be cheaper to use and more convenient for the trucks and cars that currently rely on your bridge.
We have given them. The Gordie Howe International Bridge has been under construction since 2018 and would be a third route connecting Michigan and Canada, including another bridge and a tunnel.
What happens to your business? It shrinks. The new crossing pulls traffic away from the old one. Every truck that chooses the new public bridge is a truck that no longer pays a toll on the private one. So the owner of the Ambassador Bridge has an obvious and enormous financial reason to want the new bridge to stay closed for as long as humanly possible. And this is exactly where the fresh angle of this story comes in, the part that turns it from an ordinary trade dispute into something that raises a lot of eyebrows. Because Matthew Maroon did not simply sit quietly on the sidelines. In January, he donated $1 million to a political action committee that supports President Trump. $1 million. And after that donation, he met with the United States Commerce Secretary, a man named Howard Lutnick. So you have the owner of the rival private bridge, a bridge that stands to lose business to the new public crossing, giving a very large sum of money to a group backing the president, and then sitting down for a meeting with a top official in that same administration. I want to be careful and fair here, because this is important.
The point is the president asked appropriately that his ambassador, who's from Michigan, of course, play a role in smoothing the...
Nobody has proven in a court that one thing caused the other. What we can say plainly is that the timeline exists. The donation happened, the meeting happened, and the bridge that would hurt the donor's business remains closed. Those are the facts sitting on the table. And when you lay them out in that order, you can understand why so many people looked at this situation and felt that something did not smell right. A public bridge, paid for with billions of dollars, finished and ready, kept shut, while the owner of the competing private bridge writes a very large check and gets a meeting at the highest levels of government. You do not have to be a cynic to raise an eyebrow at that sequence of events. This is the point where the whole thing spilled out of the world of trade and infrastructure and landed squarely in the middle of American politics. Because a frozen bridge, it turns out, makes a very powerful weapon in a political fight. If you are running for office and you want to argue that the other side is corrupt, that decisions are being made based on donations rather than the public good, then a giant empty bridge is almost the perfect symbol. It is visible. It is expensive. It is easy to understand. And so it became exactly that. A Democratic candidate hoping to win a seat in the United States Senate seized on the issue and released a television advertisement about it. The core message of that ad was blunt and direct. It called on President Trump to simply open the bridge. The candidate framed the closed crossing as a symbol of corruption, tying it directly to the Maroon family's $1 million donation and to that meeting with Commerce Secretary Howard Lutnick. In other words, the argument being made was this: the bridge is closed not because of any real problem with the bridge itself, but because a wealthy donor wanted it closed, and his money bought him that outcome. Whether or not you accept that argument, you can see why it is so effective as a piece of political messaging. It takes a complicated situation and boils it down to one image that anyone can grasp instantly: a finished bridge that nobody is allowed to use. But the political fight did not stay on one side. On the other side, an ally of President Trump within the Republican camp offered a completely different framing of the situation. And this is where the story connects to the bigger picture of global trade and to a third country entering the picture. This Republican ally suggested that the United States should not just open the bridge for free, so to speak, but should use it as leverage. The idea floated was that America could demand something from Canada in exchange for opening the crossing. And what they suggested America should demand was that Canada raise a tariff on vehicles made in China. Let me unpack that, because it is a clever and revealing move. A tariff is essentially a tax placed on goods coming in from another country. If Canada were to raise a tariff on Chinese-made vehicles, it would make those vehicles more expensive to sell in Canada, which would protect North American car makers from cheaper competition coming out of China. The United States has been pushing hard in recent times to limit the flow of inexpensive Chinese vehicles into the North American market. So the suggestion here was to take this closed bridge, which Canada desperately wants opened, and turn it into a bargaining chip. Open the bridge, the logic goes, but only if Canada agrees to help push back against Chinese automakers by raising that tariff. Suddenly, this is not just a story about one bridge, or about one donor, or even about two neighboring countries. It has become a story that touches on the enormous trade rivalry between the West and China, and about how a single piece of infrastructure can be used as a lever in a much larger geopolitical arm wrestling match. That is what makes this situation so fascinating. On the surface, it looks like a local dispute about a bridge in Detroit. But pull the thread and you find political donations, a Senate campaign, the Commerce Secretary, and the global fight over the future of the automobile industry, all tangled together in one place. Now I want to spend a moment on the name of the bridge, because it carries a meaning that makes the whole standoff feel even more pointed. The bridge is named after Gordie Howe. For anyone who does not follow the sport, Gordie Howe was one of the most iconic hockey players who ever lived, a legendary figure celebrated on both sides of the border. He was Canadian, but he spent nearly his entire professional career playing in Detroit, for the team known as the Red Wings.
Uncertainty have dominated the landscape.
We don't need them to make our cars, and they make a lot of them. We don't need their lumber because we have our own forests, etc., etc. We don't need their...
He was a bridge himself, in a sense, a Canadian hero who became a beloved figure in an American city, a living link between the two countries and the two cultures that share this border. So think about the symbolism here. A bridge named after a man who embodied cross-border partnership, a man who represented the friendship between Canada and the United States better than almost anyone. And that bridge is now sitting locked and empty, caught in a tug-of-war over trade, money, and politics. The thing that was meant to be a monument to cooperation between two neighbors has instead become a monument to how quickly that cooperation can break down when other interests get involved. There is something almost poetic and a little sad about that. A symbol of unity, held hostage to leverage. And that leads to the central tension that this whole situation now hangs on. You have a bridge that is completely finished. You have a bridge that has already been paid for, with billions of dollars already spent and gone. There is no more construction to do. There is no bill left to settle for building it. It exists. It works. It is ready. The only thing standing between that bridge and the traffic it was built to carry is a decision. A political choice about whether to unlock the gate. And so the question that hangs over everything is the one I opened with. How long can a finished, paid-for bridge sit empty before somebody finally blinks? Let me try to give you a real sense of what is at stake while this standoff drags on. Because it is easy to talk about bridges and donations and tariffs in the abstract, but there are real consequences flowing from all of this. Every day that the new crossing stays closed is a day that the trade between these two countries continues to funnel through the older, more crowded routes. The whole point of building the new bridge was to ease that congestion, to give trucks and travelers a faster, cheaper, more reliable way to cross. All of that promised benefit is simply sitting on the shelf, unused. The workers who built it did their jobs. The engineers who designed it did their jobs.
Piece of infrastructure is more than just a bridge. It's a time machine. At 14 minutes saved per crossing, truck drivers alone are expected to save an astonishing 800.
The money was spent, and the payoff that was supposed to come from all that effort is being withheld. There is also the matter of trust between the two nations. When two governments partner on a project of this size, when they both put their names on it and share ownership of it, there is an expectation that the project will be treated as what it is, a shared asset built for the common good. When one side then keeps it closed under circumstances that look, to a lot of observers, like they might be tangled up with a private donor's interests, that damages something harder to measure than money. It damages the sense that the partnership is being handled in good faith. And once that kind of trust starts to crack, it is very difficult to repair. Canada put up the bulk of the $6.4 billion. Canada watched the bridge get finished. And Canada is now watching it sit closed, waiting on a decision that is out of its hands. You can imagine how that feels from the Canadian side of the river. I also want to underline just how unusual this whole scenario is, because I think it is easy to lose sight of that. Infrastructure projects get delayed all the time. Bridges run over budget, ceremonies get postponed, opening dates slip.
Almost everyone. The American owners of this aging Ambassador Bridge have spent years doing everything they can to delay, derail, and destabilize.
That is ordinary. What is not ordinary is for a project to be completely finished, fully funded, ready to open, with a ceremony already on the calendar, and then to have that ceremony canceled the day before it was supposed to happen, followed by weeks of silence and a locked crossing. That is not a normal delay. That is a deliberate hold. And a deliberate hold demands an explanation, which is exactly why so many people are demanding one. Let me also be fair and lay out the way this looks from the perspective of those who defend keeping it closed, because a good news story shows you all the angles. From the standpoint of the administration and its allies, there may be an argument that the bridge should not simply open on its own terms, that the United States should get something in return, that this is a moment of leverage that should be used to advance American interests, whether that means the tariff on Chinese vehicles or some other concession. In the world of hardball trade negotiation, holding a valuable card and refusing to play it until you get the best possible deal is a recognized tactic. Those who see it that way would say this is not corruption at all, it is strategy. They would argue that a smart negotiator does not give away leverage for free, and that Canada wanting the bridge open so badly is precisely what makes keeping it closed a useful bargaining position. But here is the difficulty with that defense. The moment a private donor with a direct financial interest in keeping the bridge closed enters the picture, having given $1 million and secured a meeting with a top official, the strategic explanation and the self-interested explanation become almost impossible to tell apart. Even if the administration is genuinely holding the bridge for trade leverage, the appearance of the donation and the meeting poisons the well. It creates a situation where nobody can be sure which motive is really driving the decision. And in public life, appearances matter enormously because trust depends on them. When you cannot tell whether a decision was made for the country or for a donor, you have a problem regardless of what the truth actually is. So where does all of this leave us? We have a bridge named after a beloved cross-border legend, standing finished and empty over the water between Windsor and Detroit. We have Canada, which paid the lion's share of $6.4 billion, watching helplessly as its investment sits idle. We have the state of Michigan as a co-owner, caught in the middle. We have President Trump's administration keeping the crossing sealed. We have a private bridge owner, Matthew Maroon, whose business benefits from the closure, who gave $1 million to a group backing the president and met with Commerce Secretary Howard Lutnick. We have a Senate candidate turning the whole thing into a campaign issue about corruption. And we have a Republican voice suggesting the bridge be used to force Canada into raising tariffs on Chinese vehicles. All of it wrapped around one silent, empty crossing. The thing I keep coming back to is how strange and almost absurd the core image is. We are so used to hearing about projects that fail because they run out of money, or because they were never finished, or because something went wrong in the building of them. This is the opposite of all of that. Nothing went wrong in the building. The bridge is a success as a piece of engineering. It was completed, it was paid for, it works. And it is being kept from doing the one thing it was built to do. The failure here is not a failure of construction or of money. It is a failure of will, a decision to keep a gate locked. And that makes it a far more interesting and a far more troubling kind of failure.
Competition.
Any monopolist is going to do anything they can to protect their monopoly because the last thing they need is competition. Competition is good for the consumer, and it's bad for the one who produces it.
What happens next is the part nobody can fully predict, and that is what makes this worth watching closely in the days and weeks ahead. There are only a few ways this can go. The pressure could build to the point where the administration decides the political cost of keeping the bridge closed is higher than the benefit, and the gate finally opens. Or a deal could be struck, perhaps involving that tariff on Chinese vehicles, perhaps involving something else entirely, that gives everyone a reason to declare victory and cut the ribbon at last. Or the standoff could simply drag on, with the bridge sitting empty for weeks or even months longer, becoming an ever larger symbol of dysfunction and a heavier and heavier weight around the necks of everyone connected to it. Each of those paths is possible, and which one plays out will tell us a great deal about how these two countries and this administration handle a very public test. For now, the bridge waits. $6.4 billion of steel and concrete, a monument named for a man who spent his life bridging the gap between Canada and America, and it sits there in silence, a finished gateway with a locked gate. And the whole continent is left watching to see who blinks first, the country that built it and wants it open, or the administration that holds the key and, for reasons that remain tangled in money and politics and trade, has so far refused to turn it. That is the story of the empty bridge between Canada and America, and it is one I will keep following as it develops, because I have a strong feeling this is far from over. Thank you so much for watching this report on the frozen Gordie Howe Bridge and the standoff between Canada and the United States over whether it will ever open. If you found this breakdown useful and you want to stay on top of how this situation unfolds, please take a moment to subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so that when the next development lands, and I believe it will, you will be among the first to know. Your support means a great deal, and I look forward to bringing you the next chapter of this story the moment it happens.